Now the moment we've all been waiting for.
I am Nate Riggle, and you are listening to The Way of the Bonfire. All right, here we go. Welcome to the podcast where we focus on bringing the world and its concepts and ideas and people together in more meaningful and lasting ways so that the individual, which is you and I, and all the other good, hardworking people of this world can finally stop waiting to make the most of their lives. And what does that mean? It means we have to start connecting more. We have got to come together instead of trying to think that it's all one person or that everything is just up to you. And it's important to know that it is your responsibility what you choose to do and how you choose to build your life. But the irony of all that is you can't do it by yourself. You can do some things by yourself, but we're all independent and interdependent. And if we want more freedom and the ability to go and actually keep chasing our dreams, instead of thinking that that's some frivolous pursuit or wish, or it's impossible because we don't have enough money or enough time or enough resources, and we'll be able to do that, or we'll be happy with our lives when this one thing finally cuts loose and makes it all possible for us. And today I want to talk about why we get stuck in that thought pattern and it becomes just, we always are waiting. Any day now we say to ourselves, as soon as I get to this point, as soon as I have enough money in my bank account, as soon as I have a little more time on my calendar, as soon as my retirement account gets to this level that I'm hoping to get to, then I can start enjoying my life and I can grow the way I wanted to grow and start living life on my own terms. As soon as I have what some people call screw you money, that's when I can finally start getting after it. But if we're always waiting for the conditions to be perfect, that becomes our habit, and our minds get stuck on that, and we'll never get started, and we'll never go to what we were truly meant to do. So I know that's really general and broad, but we've got to start coming together in better ways to help each other do this. And the first step on doing that is focusing on yourself, which sounds counterintuitive. But today I want to talk about the idea behind creating space. I have a question before maybe I'll do a whole other podcast on, and I think I have done, the forgotten secret of creating space is another podcast. But before you can start to create space, you have to take inventory and realize, okay, what is taking up space for me mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and on my calendar? Like, what is actually taking up most of my time? What do I spend most of my time doing? And part of taking inventory is first asking yourself this question, because you can go and track everything you do in a day, which I highly recommend doing that for a week or a month. Like, get the Toggle app. It's free. Go and track, just log everything that you do, and it'll keep track of how long you spent on everything. And the key is you have to go and track even your social media usage. And that takes a little bit of discipline. So anything you do, before you do it, you have to put it in Toggle, and then you can do whatever you're planning on doing. That alone will start to bring you into more consciousness of your day-to-day actions and what you're actually spending your time on, not just what you think you're spending your time on. And that brings me to this question that will help you take an even more nuanced and deeper sense of inventory of your life, which is, what have you accumulated and what are you accumulating? A lot of times we think, I want to accumulate wealth, I want to accumulate good experiences and useful experiences and a resume of accomplishments. And we get pretty good at that, or we don't. But either way, like, maybe we're on a roller coaster of doing that. But either way, over time, what I didn't realize, and I kind of wish somebody would have told me this, but over time, you don't always know exactly what you're accumulating. And if I look back to when I was a teenager or a 20 something, I was constantly just like breathing fire, right? And that's what we're trying to get to. We want to be the bonfire in our lives and for others. I was constantly just so enthusiastic, breathing fire. Nothing could stop me. And accumulating those accomplishments, accumulating wealth and experience and the resume. And what I didn't realize is that I was conscious of those things, but there is a part of our mind and the way our mind works, which goes beyond just your brain. And that's actually a scientific concept, that your mind is more than your brain. There's parts of it that aren't front and center for us. And we build up all kinds of stuff over time. And hopefully it doesn't sound like too much psychobabble, and if it does, just trust me. Like when I was younger, I always thought, like, when people would get depressed and anxious and take medication for it and have to go see the therapist and all that, I was just like, whatever, just get over it. Just go for a run. And I've realized one of the biggest lessons I've realized over time is anytime I judge somebody for something, I'm bound to either pay for that in some way, or I'm bound to actually go through that struggle that they're going through. And that's what happened to me. Is I was heading into like my mid to late 30s. I had my first experience with depression and anxiety, and I was like, what is going on here? And was in denial. I thought, like, oh, I just need to buck up and work a little harder, and it'll take care of things. Like, I'll be happier about my work. I'll be happier about my marriage, and I'll be able to handle all this stuff that's been put on my plate. I thought to myself, okay, just step back up. And then it got worse, right? This is my first round. This wasn't the year ago round of this. And I went to a doctor, and the doctor said, I was trying to figure out if I should think about medication, which that appointment took me forever to schedule back then, because it was just like something in me was like, you're weak if you do this. Right. But then it finally got to the point where I was like, all right, I'm going to go talk to a doctor and see about some antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication, SSRIs. And he's a really wise doctor. And one of the things he said to me as he was kind of having the conversation, tell me about what's going on. And I was like, I can't make sense of why I feel this way, because this sort of thing's never happened to me before. And he said, yeah, you're a good guy. Guys like you, responsible guys that are trying to do good. And it's like they're holding up this pallet and people are putting new books and bricks on them. And you keep saying, I can handle it. I can handle it. I can handle it. But eventually it moves so fast that you can't adapt to it, and you can't by yourself. And that was really just a big breakthrough for me. It was kind of my first, oh, I thought I could do anything. Right. And I can, but it's not something that you do alone. And like, there's different, like I said in the last episode, there's different strategies for different stages of the game. And I was still trying to use the old strategy of just work harder, be Superman, take on everything. Don't worry about, what might be accumulating and whether or not it's weighing you down or not. And one of the things that I learned about through neuroscience and over the last 10 years and studying all kinds of things and talking to therapists and coaches and reading all these different books, is that there's your conscious mind, there's your subconscious mind, and then there's your non-conscious mind. And most of us, we think we are living consciously and that we're completely aware of what we've accumulated because we've intentionally said, I want this level of income. I want this job. I want this kind of career path. I want a marriage. I want this many kids. I want to have a house and a property and a business. And we accumulate those things, but what we're not thinking about is, what have I accumulated that I didn't notice? And subconscious mind is a little bit closer to the surface. It's things like your beliefs, which are your deeply held convictions about yourself and the world, and your memories. Those are your experiences and information that you've learned that can influence your current behavior. And then you've got your emotions. These are like your feelings that affect your decisions and your actions that you're not consciously aware of necessarily. So that's your subconscious mind. And that also includes your habits, like just anything automatic that's a habit that you do in your routines and these things that you've developed through repetition. But then your non-conscious mind, which I've only learned about more in the last year or so, is this is stuff that it's like automatic processes such as your heartbeat or your digestion, your breathing, like all your bodily functions. And then it stores this sensory information that's like data and information that comes from your senses in the brain. It processes it without you knowing that it's processing it. The body's an incredible thing, and the soul is attached to that. And, or you can call it the mind if you want to be scientific about it. But um, the procedural knowledge as well, like skills and tasks that you can do without thinking, like if you can type or if you can, the way you write and the way you ride a bike, like that's the procedural side. But there's also these other functions that, like, your emotional reactions. And these are often unconscious, and they're responses to a stimuli. Like if you flinch when there's things are dangerous that are happening, or you're just like feeling really uneasy in some environment and you just don't know why. And there's things that you've learned, like weren't consciously aware that you learned something. It's like learning a language if you're immersed in a culture, or you're learning some kind of social norm just by seeing and observing the world around you. And then there's also priming that happens where you have some stimulus and it influences your response to other stimuli and you don't realize that it's happening. So marketing uses that kind of stuff all the time. Like if I see the word yellow, that can make me more likely to recognize the word banana. And all of this stuff is kind of building up in your mind. And it's not some psychobabble. Like a lot of people hear this and they're like, is this guy just like going backwards and thinking about Freud, like where everything was associated with our sexual desires? Like, guy's outdated, but he did pioneer that there is something happening in the unconscious mind. And a lot of people have built upon that and really gotten more accurate with it. I mentioned Caroline Leaf. There's people like Daniel Kahneman, and Thinking Fast and Slow. There's Antonio Damasio. There's all kinds of scientific journals on this non-conscious mind. So the question that I would be asking is, what have you accumulated there in your non-conscious and your subconscious? And that you didn't necessarily realize you were accumulating. And there's a way to do that through mindfulness and awareness and sitting down and taking inventory. And part of the way that you do that is you stop and you say, okay, what types of things have I accumulated that may not be helping me? Like you can think of it as clutter. Here's a few things that I accumulated over time. And those are just any open loops, like things that you thought to yourself, I want to do this thing. I really need to do this thing. It maybe you even took a mental note on it, but you didn't write it down. And it just stays in your mind as an open loop. Caroline Leaf's book is called Cleaning Up Your Mental Messes. We have all kinds of clutter in our minds that we don't realize. It might be these resentments that we've stacked up over time in our marriage, in our relationships, maybe tiny little resentments that have stacked up. It might be goals that you have that you've written down tons of goals and you've accomplished some of them. Some of them you didn't write down, but you have it as a goal. It might be forgotten dreams. Like they're not truly forgotten. They're still in there. It's just your brain has decided to file them away because it wants you to survive. It wants you to be efficient and focus on what you tell it to focus on. And that's what a lot of people don't realize. We could tell our mind, like, here's what I want my emotions to mean. Here's what I want you to keep front and center. And we can build up these large and small traumas over time. Obviously, that's like what a lot of people gravitate to. But it's not just that. It's fears and limiting beliefs could be in there. There's all the times you've taken things personal. That might be an automatic response that I call that the chip on the shoulder, right? Or defensiveness. Like that might have been something that built up, and maybe you've made mistakes and you've held on to those without realizing it. There might be shame that's toxic from just actions that you regret or that you didn't mean to do, or you You're holding on to failures, and then that's creating this kind of false narrative in the background. You're believing, and you got all this, it's kind of like you're glitching a little bit, right? There's all these different false narratives in your mind. Maybe on the outside, you say all kinds of good things, but in your mind, your non-conscious mind is saying, automatically telling your body and your heart and your mind and everything to feel and react a certain way when you try to get going and you try to go and do the thing, like just take that step that you've been trying to take for years, and you say, oh, maybe someday, or I'll do that next week, or those are the things that they're just blocking it. And what that looks like is, at least for me, like, don't take this as mental or health advice or anything like that. My whole point is, this is what I've learned, and this really fits a lot for me. I think you should always question everything for yourself. And if you're really wanting to go through this process, like, look into it yourself. Go find the reputable resources with experts and all that sort of thing. But just answering that question of, what have you accumulated? What have you accumulated that you don't realize? What's come along with you in any case? And here's some of the key factors in the loss of awareness. As an entrepreneurial dad, I often deal with an array of distractions and emails and social media notifications and phone calls and a lot of other things, whether I'm at work or at home or at church or with my friends. There's this constant bombardment that can make it difficult to filter out what's truly important. And that does lead to this mental clutter and reduced awareness of what's in my non-conscious. There's the other thing is these incremental commitments that we made over time, kind of like what I was talking about when I first went to the doctor and didn't understand why I couldn't handle, like, why I was starting to fall apart. There's something happening in the background, right? It might be a meeting here and an extra task there. And over time, these little additions pile up and they become this significant burden. And it might seem like this tiny little minor thing on its own. Yeah, I can do that real quick, and then I got to get back to what I was doing. But collectively, it becomes overwhelming, and it takes up space because, again, we're trying to clear a path and make space to move forward. The other thing that happens is, like, you just have a lack of reflection time because your schedule's like, we wear this badge of busyness that can crowd out time for self-reflection. And without these regular moments of introspection, it's hard to notice when small issues start becoming larger problems. And maybe you're listening to this and being like, yeah, I know this is all true, but I'll get to that later. Later will never come. It will not come. You have to take at least 1 hour and say, all right, I'm going to put time on my calendar for reflection, and I'm going to take inventory on what I may have been accumulated. And I'm going to figure that out. If the answer is nothing, you think it's nothing, then you're blocking yourself, and you probably should go talk to a therapist or read a book about it, or understand that there's like societal and self-imposed expectations that for me, it's on dads that to succeed both professionally and personally. And entrepreneurial dads often even set higher standards for themselves, unknowingly adding pressure. Like, there's this continuous striving that can mask that accumulated stress, because we've all just learned that you push and push and push until you have a breakthrough, until you reach the top of that mountain. And then you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I'm glad I made all those crazy sacrifices and gave up some of the stuff that mattered. Now it should work. And then you look up and you're like, oh, there's like 10 more peaks I have to climb. And that starts to take a toll on you, and it accumulates. It doesn't have to be that way. And I think I mentioned this before, but stacking all these little resentments in relationships, like you miss a dinner, or somebody doesn't acknowledge an extra effort that you made, or like there's a forgotten anniversary, or there's just this one little thing that happens in a day. And it might seem trivial, but when it's left unaddressed, that stuff builds up. And this accumulation of these like little minor grievances can lead to this significant strain on your personal relationships. And we know if the people that we're close to, if those relationships have these accumulations, then that could really be contributing to the sense of why we feel so overwhelmed, like we can't go and do the things we want to do. And then there's just the emotional suppression side that a lot of men tend to do, in my experience, more than women, but I think women probably do it too. But to meet their obligations, many dads will suppress their emotions and they'll push through these tough situations. And that suppression can lead to internalizing that stress and missing these signs that indicate the need for change. And there's so in summary, it's like you got your digital overload, you got this slow buildup that's happening. You're not reflecting enough. You got higher expectations from not just yourself, but everywhere else that are accumulating. And these resentments are coming up. You're internalizing the stress. So understanding how subtle and the significant accumulation, including all of these things, is happening. And you don't have to write it all down. I mean, that would take a long time, but creating a practice where you start to say, what have I accumulated is a good thing to do to start to create that space that we're looking for and release the excess baggage and create an awareness that you don't want to add that stuff again. It's just the most wonderful thing when you do it. When you stop and you say, you know what am I carrying that I may not be aware of? It is kind of painful sometimes when you have to face it. But if you've been avoiding it and you want to move forward, you got to go answer that question first. Go get them. Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast today. I hope it had impact and meaning, but I really would like it if you work more on becoming that bonfire in your life for yourself and for other people, and start really going after that growth and that change that you've been waiting for. I promise I can help you get started on that at changewithnate.com, or you can go to the business website and we'll teach you how to grow in ways that really compound. That's at wayfirelabs.com. Either way, I hope to hear from you soon. Get on the calendar and we'll see you on the next one.